Alright, in the previous module we played around with the puts method in the IRB or interactive Ruby program within our terminal or command prompt, and now I want to play around with it within a regular .rb Ruby file within our Atom text editor. Let's begin by using the puts method twice to output two different strings. I'll begin with puts hello world, and I'm going to place this within double quotes. That ensures that this is going to be interpreted as a string. And remember, a string in Ruby is just a collection of characters that are strung together or sequenced together. So I'm going to do puts hello world, and on the line below I'm going to write puts I'm alive and well with, let's say, an exclamation point. Now puts, as we know, simply outputs whatever you give it at the end to the screen. So when I execute Atom Runner, we can see that hello world and I'm alive and well are going to appear here on the right. Everything that's within the double quotes will appear right here when it's printed. You can also notice that each line here is on a separate line. So there's been an automatic line break created. And that's actually a feature that's part of the puts method in Ruby. Whenever you use puts, no matter what you write after it, Ruby is automatically going to add a line break at the very end. So after Ruby is done outputting hello world, it's going to add a line break, which allows the next puts statement, which is I'm alive and well, to begin on the very next line. In fact, because I'm alive and well is also part of the puts method, Ruby will add a line break at the very end of well here. It's just a little bit less visible or a little bit more difficult to see because of the white space right here. But rest assured, each puts command is going to add a line break to the end. Now, a puts method is an example of a statement, and a statement is a single command in Ruby. So what we have here on line 1 is one statement, and what we have here on line 2 is another statement, simply a command. Now, a statement can conclude with a semicolon. That's a very popular design in many programming languages. So you can see code like this, and this is valid Ruby. However, most Rubyists do not write the semicolon at the end of a single statement. The one exception where you may see this, it's still uncommon, is whenever you have more than one statement per line. In this case, we have each statement on a separate line to help with readability. But something like this, where you have multiple put statements on a single line, is allowed. And because we're separating each of them, we have to use the semicolon. You can think of the semicolon as a terminator. It basically tells Ruby that whatever command it's processing, that's the end. That's the end of the line, the end of the road. So when Ruby is reading puts hello world, it knows that the semicolon concludes that command, and it can move on to the next one. But you can see things are already getting kind of messy here. So the general best practice is to write a single statement on a single line. And because that's the case and Ruby automatically knows to conclude a statement at the end of each line, it doesn't need the semicolon, the most common practice is to exclude the semicolon and simply write one statement per line. So just like this, as clean as it can possibly be, is the most popular way to do it. So as we've seen so far, the puts method outputs something to the screen and automatically adds a line break to the end of the output. So far we've done simple basic strings that just include common letters. But remember that a string is just a sequence of characters. Even in the ones above, we had things like the exclamation point and the spaces. These are not valid letters, but these are valid characters. And a string can include other characters such as symbols. So for example, I can write something like puts I bought $5 at the store. That includes a number 5 in there, and when I execute this, we can see that it's going to appear here to the right, no problem. And for something a bit more complex, I can write puts I made 65, if I can type, I made $65 or a profit of 25%, exclamation point. So in this one we use an exclamation point, we use a percentage sign and a $sign in front of 65. No problem, Ruby will simply output that string to the screen. So a string can include more than just letters. It can include spaces, characters, numbers, and so on. So the previous 4 examples have used the puts method to output a string, which is just a collection of characters. However, we're not limited strictly to strings. The puts method is a lot more versatile. So let's see what happens when we use puts with a simple number. I'm going to write puts 5, and you'll notice that 5 is not going to be wrapped in double quotes. It's just the number 5. When I execute this code, we can see that 5 appears here, no problem. and that's an integer number. We can try a similar experiment with a floating point number. A floating point number is just a number with a decimal component. So if I do something like puts 3.14159, that's pi as an example of one floating point number. Here we can see it outputs to the right, no problem there. Now keep in mind that strings are not numbers. Strings are totally different, and sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. For example, if I write puts 3.14159, but I wrap it in quotes, it automatically becomes a string. And when I execute this again, we can see that on the right in the output there is no difference in how it appears when used with puts. However, 3.14159 within quotes is a string. It's a totally separate object and has totally separate functionalities. So with something like numbers, for example, we can do mathematical operations. With strings, we cannot. And if you're using the wrong data type, you can run into errors. So let me give you one example. So what I'm going to do here is just remove the double quotes right here. And let's say below I want to do some kind of mathematical operation. Let's say I want to do puts 4 plus 3. Now in this case we have two numbers, 4 and 3, and we use the plus sign, which is a common programming operator or sign or symbol for addition, much like it is in regular mathematics, and we'll dive into this in a greater detail in a few lessons. For now we're simply adding 4 plus 3, and we can see here when we execute this that Ruby is successfully going to output 7 on the right. It knows that when you have two numbers, it can add them together to get the result, and that's what we're putting or outputting on the right here. However, if one of our numbers, so to speak, is a string, if I do something like puts 4 plus 3, you can see I've wrapped that 4 in double quotes. It's no longer a number. It's now a string. So when Ruby looks at this, it's going to think that it's a string. It's just a random character. It's no different than the letter A or the letter J or the exclamation point. It's just the character of 4. And it doesn't know how to add a character of 4 to a number of 3. So we're going to see a big red flashing error message on the right here. It doesn't even matter what order we proceed in. If we do something like 4 plus 3 as a string, we're going to get the exact same error. Ruby doesn't know how to combine a string plus a number. So watch out for that. Just because it outputs like a string doesn't mean that it is a string. Let's see what happens, interestingly enough, when we try to use the plus symbol to combine two strings. In the example above, we did 4 plus 3 and we treated them as numbers. What if we do something like string 4 plus string 3? Both of those are written in double quotes, so they're just being treated as characters. When I execute this, you'll see that Ruby is going to output 43. And as you can probably guess, what it's doing is taking those two strings and simply combining them or smushing them on top of each other. In programming terms, that's called concatenation. That's basically when one string is appended or added to the end of another. So what it's doing is taking that string of 3 and concatenating it to the end of the string of 4 and then outputting it to us in our Atom runner. So how the plus symbol works is going to vary depending on whether you're using something like numbers or integers and whether you're using strings. So watch out for that. Now to reiterate, the most important thing to remember about puts is that it automatically adds a line break at the end of every output that you do. So far we've had 8 separate put statements, so we've had 8 line breaks. That allows the next output to begin on the next line. Here's where it gets really interesting. You can actually use puts like this without actually giving it anything to output. What this will do is output nothing, but remember that puts automatically adds a line break to the end. So what puts by itself is going to do is simply add a line break. Now this may not be easily visible when I execute this, but rest assured we've added an additional line break at the end of our output. So if I just, let's say, put another puts and another puts, and now I'm just going to put C, there's a bunch of line breaks above. When I execute this, we can see that that line has appeared right here as a string, and then we have all of these extra lines or empty lines right here from all of those puts methods that we've called without any specific outputs. The puts method always adds a line break even when it doesn't output anything. That's what makes it unique. So as we proceed throughout the course, whenever I'm going to break up different statements or different put statements just so we can read our output a little bit easier, this is going to be a very common technique I do simply to isolate the content. So for example, if I wanted to show you the difference between what this results in and what this results in right here, I might do something like put a puts right here, and we can see there's a separator now between them, an empty white line, and we can see that those two are separated. Sometimes it makes things a little bit easier to read in the output. But that's a quick introduction to the puts method, which outputs something to the screen and adds a line break at the end. And in the next lesson, we'll explore the print method, which is almost identical. The only difference is print does not include a line break. So I'll see you there.